The morning moved forward without urgency, the pale heat rising slowly from the grasslands as insects stirred and distant birds traced invisible paths through the air. The ranger walked with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned to listen with his whole body, not just his ears. Each step pressed lightly into the earth, careful not to disturb what did not wish to be disturbed. It was there, beneath a veil of tall, sun-bleached grass, that he noticed the stillness first. Not the peaceful stillness of rest, but the heavy, uncertain kind that does not belong in a place shaped by constant motion. He stopped several meters away. The lion lay stretched on her side, her broad flank barely rising and falling, each breath shallow and uneven. Dust clung to her fur, dulling its usual golden sheen. One hind leg rested at an awkward angle, partly hidden by grass stems bent under her weight. Her tail lay unmoving, its dark tuft pressed into the soil as though it had been placed there deliberately and forgotten. Around her, life continued without pause. A group of antelope grazed at a distance. Cicadas pulsed softly in the background. The savanna did not adjust itself for weakness. The ranger lowered himself slowly to one knee. His binoculars remained unused. At this distance his eyes were enough. He studied the slight tremor along her rib cage, the faint tightening of her jaw when the wind shifted. Her ears flicked once, then again, responding to sounds he could barely detect. Though her body remained heavy against the ground, her awareness had not left her. Fatigue and injury had softened her, but they had not erased her vigilance. A faint rasp escaped her throat as she attempted to adjust her position. The effort seemed to cost her more than it should have. Her muscles quivered, then relaxed again into stillness. One eye opened briefly, revealing a clouded, wary gaze that swept the space before settling on him. It did not hold challenge. It held assessment, quiet and guarded. The kind of look that measured risk when strength was low. He kept his posture low, his hands visible, his breathing slow. Years in the field had taught him that urgency often frightened more than it helped. He shifted his weight carefully and murmured almost without sound, "Easy, it's all right." The words were not meant to reassure her in any human sense. They were meant to steady himself, to remind his own body to remain calm. The grass whispered softly as a breeze passed through, brushing against her mane and lifting loose strands along her shoulder. Flies hovered briefly, then drifted away. She twitched her skin in response, a small reflex, proof that her nervous system still answered when called. Her chest rose again, slightly deeper this time, then fell. From where he knelt, he could see faint abrasions along her flank and a darker patch near her hip where fur had been matted by dried blood. Nothing about it suggested sudden violence. It spoke instead of slow depletion, of hunger, strain, perhaps a long walk taken on a body already weakening. In the wild, such stories were written quietly, one exhausted step at a time. He reached for his radio but did not activate it yet. For now, observation was more important than intervention. He needed to understand her rhythm, her limits, her threshold for disturbance. Another soft breath passed her lips, carrying with it a low, almost inaudible sound, somewhere between a sigh and a growl. Above them, the sky widened, pale and endless. Somewhere far off, another lion called, its voice drifting across the plains like a reminder of what she belonged to. The sound faded into distance, leaving only the rustle of grass and the slow, fragile pattern of her breathing, suspended between effort and endurance. Time passed in small, almost invisible measures. The ranger remained where he was, allowing the air between them to settle, allowing her to decide what this quiet presence meant. The sun climbed higher, warming the backs of grass blades and drawing faint shimmer from the ground. With each minute, the light revealed more of her condition. The uneven rise of her chest, the stiffness along her spine, the way one shoulder sank slightly deeper into the earth than the other. He shifted forward by only a few centimeters, sliding his knee through the grass without lifting it. The sound was barely noticeable, but her body registered it immediately. Her ears flattened for a moment. A low tension passed through her frame, subtle yet unmistakable. One forepaw flexed weakly, claws pressing into soil before relaxing again. She did not attempt to rise. She could not. Instead, she gathered herself inward, conserving what little strength remained. Her head lifted an inch, trembling with effort, then settled back down. The movement seemed to cost her more than it should have. A thin breath escaped her nostrils, stirring dust. Her eye opened again, wider this time, dark and reflective. It followed him closely, tracking the slow adjustment of his posture, the careful placement of his hands against his thighs. Nothing about her gaze suggested surrender. It spoke of alertness held together by fatigue. He stopped moving. His body became part of the landscape, another quiet shape among stones and grass. He let his shoulders soften. His breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm he observed in her chest. In these moments, connection did not arrive through action. It arrived through restraint. A distant wind brushed across the plain, bending grasses in gentle waves. The sound passed over them both, soft and steady. She responded with a faint lift of her chin, testing the air, drawing in unfamiliar scents. His presence was now part of that mixture. Human. Fabric. Thus. Come. Her tail shifted slightly, tracing a weak line in the dirt. The movement was slow, uncertain, as if her body were asking permission from itself before continuing. She adjusted her hind leg by a fraction, wincing as muscle tightened and released. A quiet sound vibrated in her throat, not a warning, not a call, simply the sound of discomfort finding its way out. He leaned forward just enough for his voice to carry, keeping it low and unshaped by urgency. "You're safe." "I'm here," he whispered. The words drifted toward her and dissolved into the warm air. She did not flinch. Her breathing remained steady. After several seconds, her eyelids lowered halfway, not in sleep, but in something closer to guarded rest. It was the smallest shift, but it mattered. A fly settled briefly on her shoulder. She twitched, then stilled again. Her body was negotiating constantly between irritation, pain, and survival. Each small response was evidence of persistence. Each breath was a choice to remain. The ranger did nothing more. He did not reach. He did not close the distance further. He stayed within the boundaries she had drawn without words. In that shared stillness, something fragile took shape, not trust in the human sense but recognition. Two living beings, grounded in the same heat, the same wind, the same uncertain stretch of time. Above them, clouds drifted slowly, reshaping themselves without concern. The grass whispered again. And between those quiet sounds, her breathing continued, steady enough to be heard, steady enough to hold. The stillness did not last forever. It softened first, then shifted as distant footsteps and faint radio murmurs approached through the grass. The ranger had signaled quietly, carefully, and now two members of the wildlife team moved into view, their bodies low, their pace measured. They followed the same language of restraint, reading the lion's posture before allowing themselves to come closer. Nothing about their arrival was sudden. It unfolded like a slow tide. The heat had begun to press downward with greater weight. It settled on skin and fur alike, drawing moisture from breath and muscle. The lion's sides moved more noticeably now, each rise and fall slightly faster than before. Fatigue clung to her like dust. Her mouth opened briefly, releasing warm air, then closed again as she struggled to regulate her breathing. The team halted several meters away. One knelt beside the first ranger. Another remained standing, scanning the surrounding grass. Their presence widened the quiet circle around her. In the distance, impalas paused mid-graze. A pair of vultures drifted lower in the sky, tracing slow spirals without committing to descent. The savanna had noticed. The ranger closest to her extended a padded pole with a small shade cloth attached. He moved it forward inch by inch, stopping whenever her ears flicked or her breathing altered. When the cloth finally hovered above her head and shoulders, it softened the harsh sunlight, creating a narrow island of cooler shadow. The change was subtle, but her body responded. Her breathing slowed by a fraction. Her jaw loosened slightly. Another ranger prepared fluids, his hands steady, movements economical. There was no rush in his gestures, only purpose. A small needle was positioned carefully beneath loose skin along her flank. She tensed when it touched her, muscles tightening in weak protest. A quiet, strained sound escaped her throat. "It's all right, almost done," the first ranger murmured. The needle slid in. Clear liquid began its slow descent into her system. Drop by drop, it carried relief measured not in comfort but in possibility. Her body accepted it reluctantly at first, then more willingly as if recognizing the offering. Her foreleg twitched. Her tail shifted again, tracing another shallow line in the dirt. She attempted to lift her head, failed, then tried once more. This time it rose slightly higher before settling back. Sweat darkened the fur along her neck. Her tongue flicked briefly across dry lips. Around them the quiet audience remained. Antelope clustered near a line of shrubs. Birds perched in stillness, their calls muted. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, passing gently over the scene without force. The interruption had created a pocket of suspended time. Minutes stretched thin. Each breath she took felt counted. Each exhale carried both effort and release. The rangers watched her chest closely, noting every change, every pause, every irregularity. They adjusted the shade when the sun shifted. They shifted their own weight when grass crackled too loudly. The fluids continued to flow. Gradually, the tension in her shoulders eased. The sharp edge of distress softened into something closer to endurance. Her eyelids lowered again, not in surrender, but in conservation. Energy was being rationed carefully, stored for later use. When the bag finally emptied, it was removed as gently as it had been placed. No one celebrated. No one spoke. They simply remained, attentive, present, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing as it steadied, one fragile victory at a time. The afternoon light began to shift, stretching longer shadows across the plain as the heat loosened its grip. The rangers remained close, but their movements grew quieter, smaller, shaped by the understanding that their presence was no longer urgently required. The fluids had settled into her system. Her breathing had found a steadier rhythm. The sharpest edge of danger had softened into something more manageable. Slowly they began to prepare for distance. One by one tools were gathered. The shade cloth was raised a few inches, then held in place, allowing her to adjust. When no sign of distress followed, it was lifted away completely. Sunlight returned to her fur, gentler now, filtered through drifting clouds. She blinked against it, her eyes narrowing briefly before settling again. The first ranger shifted backward on his knees, creating more space. His movements were deliberate, respectful, as though stepping away from something fragile and still forming. The others followed, retreating in small stages, never turning their backs fully, never moving too quickly. For several moments nothing changed. Then her body stirred. A subtle tightening passed along her spine. Her forelegs drew inward. Muscle gathered slowly, uncertainly, like a wave forming without confidence. Her head lifted, higher than it had before, no longer trembling quite as violently. Her chest expanded deeply, filling with warm air. With visible effort, she rolled slightly onto her belly. The movement was incomplete at first. She paused, resting, breath rushing through her. Dust clung to her whiskers. Her sides heaved, then steadied. After a few seconds, she tried again. This time, her forepaws found firmer purchase. Her shoulders rose. Her body followed, inch by inch, until she was partially upright, supported by her front legs. The rangers froze. No one spoke. No one moved. Her head lifted higher. Her neck stretched forward into the open air. For a moment, she remained like that, suspended between weakness and resolve, listening to something beyond human hearing. Then a sound emerged from her throat. It was not loud. It did not carry authority. It was thin, uneven, shaped by fatigue and restraint. A low, wavering call that barely rose above the rustling grass. Yet it traveled farther than its softness suggested, slipping into the wide spaces of the savanna. She paused, drawing breath again, then released another call, slightly stronger than the first. The grasslands answered slowly. At first there was only movement. A ripple near the horizon. A shift among distant shrubs. Then shapes began to separate themselves from the background. One lioness appeared, her head lifted, her body alert. Then another. Farther back, a younger male stepped into view, followed by two subadults moving cautiously at his sides. They did not rush. They approached with measured steps, reading the scene as carefully as the rangers had earlier. Their bodies remained low, their tails relaxed but ready. Eyes fixed on her. When they drew close enough to see her clearly, they slowed further. She released one more quiet call. This time it was answered with soft chuffs and low rumbles, exchanged gently without display. The pride gathered around her in a loose semicircle. One lioness pressed her head briefly against her shoulder. Another stood guard, scanning the surroundings. A younger member lay down nearby, facing outward. Contact was minimal. Presence was everything. The rangers continued to withdraw, becoming smaller shapes at the edge of the grass. Soon only their silhouettes remained. At the center of the quiet gathering, she lowered herself carefully onto the ground again, now surrounded by warmth and familiar scent. The wind moved through the savanna, bending the grass around them, carrying their mingled breaths outward into the open, waiting land. Evening arrived without announcement. It slipped quietly across the plains, cooling the air and softening the sharp edges of light that had defined the day. The sky faded from pale blue into layers of amber and muted gray. Long shadows stretched outward from every blade of grass, every resting body, every distant tree. The heat loosened its grip, leaving behind a gentle stillness that settled over the land. The pride remained close. They had arranged themselves around her instinctively, without conflict or display. One lioness lay along her back, her flank pressed lightly against the injured body. Another rested near her hind legs, facing outward. The younger members remained slightly apart, alert but calm, watching the surrounding grass for movement. Their breathing blended into a slow, collective rhythm, rising and falling in quiet unison. She lay on her side again, but her posture had changed. Her muscles no longer collapsed into the earth. Her head rested higher. Her chest expanded more fully with each breath. Fatigue remained, visible in the heaviness of her eyelids and the occasional tremor along her limbs, but it no longer dominated her. Strength was returning in small, careful measures. From time to time, one of the Pride members shifted closer, brushing her shoulder with a paw or pressing a cheek briefly against her neck. These gestures were brief and unremarkable, woven naturally into the stillness. No sound accompanied them. No ceremony marked them. They were simply acts of presence, of shared survival. A low rumble passed through the group, barely audible, more vibration than sound. She responded with a faint exhale, her whiskers twitching slightly as she adjusted her position. Her tail flicked once, then settled. At a distance, the ranger stood quietly. He had moved farther back now, placing himself beyond the boundary of their gathering. From where he stood, the lions were no longer individuals but a single, breathing form against the land. He lowered his binoculars and let them rest against his chest. There was nothing more to record. Nothing more to influence. The grass bore the imprint of his presence. Shallow depressions marked where he had knelt. Faint lines traced where equipment had been placed and removed. Soon, wind and wandering insects would erase them. By morning, the land would carry no visible memory of what had occurred. He took a final step backward, then another. His boots pressed softly into cooling soil. Each movement was unhurried, unremarkable. He did not look back again. He did not need to. What mattered was already complete. Behind him, the Pride remained. The sun lowered further, its light thinning into gold and copper. It spilled across their fur, catching on whiskers and curved ears, tracing the slow rise and fall of ribs. In the distance, birds began their evening calls, threading quiet notes through the air. Somewhere beyond sight, hooves shifted. Insects resumed their steady pulse. She breathed in deeply this time. The air filled her lungs without strain. It left her body without effort. Another breath followed. Then another. Each one carried her forward, unseen, into the coming days. As darkness gathered gently at the edges of the plains, the lions lay together, unmoving and awake, surrounded by wind, fading light, and the wide patience of the land.